7 things Americans have more than British people. This is going to be very interesting to see. I'm looking forward to it. Let's get into it.
We're on. Hello, I'm Lawrence, and I'm on a quest to uncover all of the memos that Britain and America lost in the pond. And one of those memos pertains to the things we own, whether that's money, a house, your soul. We all have things in our possession that make us who we are. But after living in the United States for 16 years, I've come to find that Americans are more likely to own certain things than British people are. Same is true in reverse, but that's not what this video is about. Now, if you own a free subscription to this YouTube channel, thanks. If not, do that now.
You guys heard it. Do that now. Make sure you subscribe. Also, I now have a membership thing. If you want to support extra, don't feel like you got to, just an extra way to help support what I do, being a full-time content creator.
Oh, sorry for scaring the cat. In the meantime, here are 7 things that Americans are more likely to own than British people.
Car.
And the first thing that we're going to talk about is cars. And you might be thinking, Lawrence, that's not surprising. You always talk about how America has a really large car culture. And this is true, but I think that ignores the fact that when I lived in Britain, I was far more likely to experience a traffic jam. Why is that, Lawrence? Well, because we have way more people in a smaller area. And so even though there are fewer cars per person, there are still millions of cars. So that probably cemented in my head a false impression of.
Yeah, that also makes sense because in the UK, it'll be much easier to get public transport because everything kind of makes sense that it's closer to you, seeing that there's less people, as he said, in more like crowded space. Well, that is like particularly crowded, I would say, even though obviously it's getting in a little bit more like that. But it does make sense that Americans would need a car to obviously travel longer, because where in England you could probably walk to the shop or get a really quick train to the shop, you would probably have to drive for a little bit to get to a Walmart or a Target in America.
Just how many cars we have in England compared to here. But there's no arguing with facts, even though some of you try. In the US, about 91% of households own at least one car, while in the UK it's closer to 77%. Of course, Americans don't just stop at one car, they're often juggling 2, 3, maybe 4 vehicles per family. Practically.
Does insurance work the same way in America than the UK? That's what I wonder. Can you get insured with all of your cars in one? Because to be honest, I don't really know how it works in the UK. I've only got one car that the insurance is massive on. I don't know if the insurance is as much as it is in the UK as it is in the US, because it is a lot of money here. Well, especially for a 18-year-old who hasn't been driving for long. But yeah, I do not blame you guys for having multiple cars. My dream is to have a kind of a sporty or classic car, and then my bigger truck family car.
Enough to start a car dealership. This partly explains why in the state of Montana, each resident averages nearly 2 cars. In Britain, if somebody owns 2 cars, they're either a millionaire or a car thief. In fact, the idea of parking more than one car outside of your average British home sounds like a logistical nightmare. So while Brits are debating whether to pay for an MOT this year, Americans are hopping into their pickup trucks, SUVs, and maybe even a spare
dog.
Perhaps one of the more surprising entries on this list is that Americans are more likely than British people to own a dog. Firstly, I can say that anecdotally as somebody who lived in Britain for a long time and didn't own my own dog, but did after I moved to the United States. Therefore, that's proof. It's just not very good proof. But before we look at the facts again, I have more anecdotes. Because initially, after I moved to the US, I lived with my in-laws who had 240 dogs. It was 3 dogs, but I mean, still 3 dogs feels like a lot, especially as somebody who raised a puppy last year. And yet it feels like it's not particularly uncommon in America. In Britain, as my wife said to me the other day, we seem to have a concern about leaving dogs alone when we go to work, which is fair enough, but I'm, a YouTube sensation and I work from home, so I don't have that problem.
Lawrence, we really need to work on your relatability.
That said, it is one thing to feel that Americans have more dogs than British people. Once again, here's voiceover, Lauren.
It does make sense because usually houses are probably bigger in the US, and you probably got a much bigger yard than we do in the UK. Unless you're rich, you don't have a big yard in the UK unless you live in Scotland.
From the basement to give you the facts. Statistically, around 40% of American households have at least one dog, which means that the other 60% have made a mistake. Compare this to the UK.
I really want a dog, by the way. That's one thing I'll put out there. I love dogs. Dogs, in my opinion, are better than cats, but you can let me know in the comments, okay?
Where the percentage is thought to be between 30 and 36%. So why is there a disparity? Well, maybe it's because dogs require something that we as a nation of British people haven't quite figured out: enthusiasm. Either way, Americans don't just live with dogs, they treat them like royalty. Doggy daycare, pup cups, Halloween costumes, and I was about to say that it all sounds a little bit much, but then I remembered Arthur has enjoyed all three of those things.
Just very quickly from me, guys, I'm live almost every day over on my Twitch. Hell, I'm probably live right now, so go check it out. Also, if you do want to support my dream of becoming a full-time content creator, there is a donation link in the description. Don't feel like you got to donate. It's just a way you support if you like my content.
So my face turned into thumbnail Lawrence because, and I hope you're sitting down for this, Americans are more likely to own a gun than British people.
No way.
Which might sound like sarcasm, but one thing that often doesn't get spoken about when it comes to Britain is we do have guns. It's true. Contrary to popular belief, not all guns are completely banned across the UK. They're just heavily regulated. In order to obtain a rifle or a shotgun, a civilian must obtain applicable licenses and must have a valid reason for owning one. These reasons include sport shooting and hunting, but don't extend to firing off a few rounds at midnight on New Year's Eve. And yes, that last sentence was aimed at Chainsaw Jim. However, as is famously known, this pales in comparison to gun ownership in the United States. In the US, it turns out there are more guns than people. For every 100 Americans, there are about 125.
There's more guns than people. No, that's crazy. That is crazy. I mean, firstly, about guns in the UK, like, I don't know anyone who owns a gun, really. No one. I know people who own, like, airsoft guns, real guns, like proper real guns, not air rifles. No one.
Firearms, making it the highest such ratio in the world. For sake of comparison, 100 Brits will statistically have about 5, which is similar to the percentage of Brits that have been thrown out of a pub. Coincidence? I don't know. So Brits often ask me, "Ooh, Lawrence, how many guns do you see every single day?" And the answer to that is next to zero. Because unless you happen to be friends with hunters, members of the police force, or gangs, people aren't just wielding them on the street, they conceal them in their clothes. I don't have x-ray eyes, so I just assume that maybe they're there. There's a surprising lack of visibility around guns. And you might say, Lawrence, that's because you live in Illinois where they have strict open carry laws, but the thing is, I also lived in Indiana where they don't, and it was the same story. I'm really just pointing this out so that my Aunt Mildred stops asking me if I'm alright. Walking down the street, I think I've maybe seen one gun in 16 years wielded on the street, and it was a super soaker. Yes, a lot of American households, I would imagine, do own a Bible. And that's because I think Americans in general, if they are religious, are more likely to wear their religion on their sleeve than we are in Britain, where people, generally speaking, keep that to themselves. I think as well, it's fair to say that Britain is a more secular culture. We've got a higher percentage of people there that I would say are non-believers or non-practicing religious people. Whereas here, while, you know, America doesn't have churches that are 800 years old, it does have churches on about every corner trying to compete with Starbucks. And so Bibles, as well as crucifixes on walls, and maybe a Bible verse or two hanging on the same wall, is just something you see way more of here. You know, even people I've known who aren't like particularly overtly religious have that stuff on their walls because it's just sort of culturally ingrained. Here's a statistic for you.
Yes.
In the US, nearly 88% of households own at least one Bible. And not just that, the average household owns 4, about one for each car. Now, I couldn't find any reliable statistics for Britain, but I did find this. Only 6% of Brits actively practice Christianity or regularly read the Bible. So whether it's a sign of devotion or, you know, a cultural habit, the Bible is...
So America is much more religious than the UK is definitely one thing that I've like gathered through watching these kind of videos, which is great, really. People practice their religion, which I can only respect.
Clearly a key player in American households, and as for Britain, let's just say the Bible's collecting dust next to that unopened copy of Pride and Prejudice. Gym memberships, and some of you might be watching this going, isn't America famously kind of overweight and out of shape? And while there are very much elements of that, it's also a country of extremes. We talked about this recently, to the extent that gym culture, just like car culture, just like any other embedded culture within American culture is a real thing. You could be driving through Chicago just down the street and you look to your right and see people working out through a window. And these are not uncommon. But for me, growing up in Britain, I think the last time I went to a gym was at school. Actually, I think that's still the case. I don't know why that is. I think we're a nation of joggers, so we like to work out that way, and cycling. I think our country has the infrastructure for outdoor exercise more perhaps than the United States does. Where also, I think you're less likely to find a sort of public swimming bath. Like, they do exist here, but in Britain they're far more common, although the one that I grew up with in my hometown closed down, so I don't know how true that still is. I think it's just we have different ways of staying in shape. Statistically, around 24% of Americans claim to have a gym membership, which sounds impressive until you realise that most of us think that leg day is walking to and from the basement, and cardio means bending down to tie your shoelace. Meanwhile, the British approach fitness with a little more subtlety. About 14% of Brits are signed up for a gym, but it's not because they're less active. After all, lugging around 4 shopping bags of Tesco meal deals has its own charm. Why sweat in lycra when you've got the great outdoors and a pot noodle as your workout incentive? And yes,
Sweatpants.
something that you might wear at a gymnasium, Sweatpants. I remember having a pair of sweatpants when I was a child. I don't remember owning a single pair since then. In Britain, it could be that we're less likely to embrace casual fashion, although I do remember shell suits. Here, sweatpants aren't just the fashion choice of the gymnasium goers. I sometimes see people walking down this street in them.
It's a shame that I changed just before filming this video, because what I was wearing before happened to be sweatpants. Like, I put on my shorts now because it's getting hot in here, but I was wearing my sweatpants before. And also, what is going on with the sun just happened to have a sun mark on my mouth, so I apologize for that.
Or going to the shops, or sitting in a restaurant. And frankly, they just look a little bit silly. Although I've just remembered I was wearing a raccoon suit earlier. So what do we think, voiceover Lawrence? Are your observations of sweatpants accurate? Americans are nearly twice as likely to own a pair of sweatpants compared to their British counterparts. Twice! And that's not just some stat I've made up. That's a stat that ChatGPT just made up, but it sounds right. Meanwhile, across the pond, Britons seem to reserve their sweatpants for painting the house. It's less Netflix and chill, and more DIY and drill. But maybe it comes down to the weather. I mean, Americans enjoy a cozy sweatpant year round thanks to air-conditioned bliss, whereas Brits don't do that. So is this a love story between Americans and their joggers, or just a cultural misunderstanding about what's truly formal wear for a Target run? Either way, the numbers don't lie, even made-up ones. Sweatpants are basically America's second uniform. Not to finish talking about toilets, but we're going to finish talking about toilets. Because in the vast majority of the more than 10 American addresses that I've lived at, there has been a second toilet. Am I complaining? No, because then you get one to yourself when you live with only one other person. Mine's the basement one. But in Britain, a second toilet within a house, I think would be considered a luxury. And maybe that's down to the fact...
This might sound crazy. I don't know anyone who doesn't have 2 toilets. And maybe one person. I've got 2 toilets in my house. Like, I think I might know one person who has 1 toilet, but he only lives with his mum. Just them 2. So like, there's not much need for it. But yeah, this is definitely not rare to have more than 2 toilets, or not more than 1 toilet. Sorry. So yeah, this isn't make much sense to me, because obviously in America it makes sense that people would have more than 1 toilet as well, but I definitely wouldn't say it's a luxury in the UK to have more than 1 toilet. Like, almost everyone's got them in the average household. They would usually have like 1 downstairs and then 1 upstairs.
That our houses are smaller, or that we don't have White Castle. But I think every address that I lived at in Britain had just the 1, which is really bad when it gets blocked and you live with 5 people. According to a recent survey, 65% of US homes have 2 bathrooms compared...
I need to factor this. What percent of UK houses have more than 1 bathroom? Wait, so 46% of the UK homes had a second toilet. So wait, it's only 50%. No way. Higher on these figures are. I did not know this. That must make. That makes me sound really rich, but that's crazy. Wow. I guess I just live in an area where having 2 bathrooms is normal. That's crazy. I did not know that.
Compared to just 27% in the UK. Now, that's not just convenience, it's a logistical dream. Imagine never having to queue up at 7 a.m, dodging flatmates in fluffy robes while clutching a toothbrush like a weapon of war. So why is there
One thing I will say is, obviously, I live with my parents still. I want to move out as soon as I can. Obviously, money and that. I think when I move out, there'll definitely be only 1 toilet in my house or apartment. So I guess it does make sense that somebody who's been working for their entire life, like my dad, is more likely to have 2 toilets in the house than someone who's like moving out or someone who's just like, I'm sure he was much younger when he lived in the UK, so he probably didn't have 2 bathrooms then, if you know what I mean.
Well, it boils down to that thing again. Space. The average American home is over twice the size of the average British one, meaning there's plenty of room to fit that extra throne. Although in Britain, we do have actual thrones. Anyway, that was it. I'm sure
Well, guys, thank you so much for watching today's video. Guys, make sure to please go and check out my Twitch. I'm live every day over there. And yeah, I love you guys, and I'll see you all in my next video.